If Pete noticed anything amiss, he didn't show it. That was the thing about him. He never seemed to pick up on subtle shifts, not like Mark did. Over the next few weeks, Mark and I fell into a routine. Coffee breaks turned into stolen moments, and work-related texts began to take on a different tone entirely. Hi, this is Pete. So there I was, sitting on the couch, still recovering from the massive feast Stephanie and I had indulged in to celebrate our 5th wedding anniversary. We went all out, dinner, gifts, reminiscing about how we first met. Everything felt perfectly normal, and then out of nowhere, she dropped the bomb. I want a divorce. At first, I thought she was joking. A cruel joke, maybe, but a joke nonetheless. I even chuckled a little, waiting for her to laugh along. But Stephanie didn't laugh. She didn't even crack a smile. She just sat there, calm and composed, with her hands folded neatly in her lap, as if she'd just mentioned we were out of milk. Wait, what? I finally managed to ask. I'm not happy, Pete, she said, her voice flat and detached. I think it's best if we separate. Not happy? This was the same woman who only an hour earlier had been all smiles, joking about how we should have ordered dessert instead of pretending to care about calories. Now all of a sudden she wasn't happy? It didn't make sense. I tried to keep my composure and asked her questions. What had changed? Why now? Did something happen? Her answers were vague, almost rehearsed. It's just how I feel, she repeated over and over like a broken record. That night I couldn't sleep. Every little thing Stephanie had done recently played on a loop in my head. The late nights at work, her sudden obsession with keeping her phone nearby, even during dinner, and how distant she'd been. At the time, I chalked it up to work stress or her needing space. Now it all felt suspicious, like pieces of a puzzle I'd been too blind to fit together. One thing about me, my gut instincts are usually spot on, and my gut was screaming at me that there was more to this story. I hate feeling like a fool, but I also hate jumping to conclusions. So I decided to play it smart. Observe, pay attention. Maybe I was wrong and it was all in my head. Or maybe, just maybe, Stephanie was hiding something. The next morning, I tried to act normal. Cool, even. No sense in letting her suspect anything. She was in the kitchen, scrolling through her phone as if nothing had happened. I asked if she wanted coffee. She barely glanced up. No thanks. I'll grab some on my way to work, she replied. On your way to work? I repeated casually. Funny how she'd never needed coffee on the way to work before. Not when we made it together every morning. Big day at the office? I asked. Yeah, meetings, and more meetings, she said, her eyes glued to her screen. When she left, I stood by the window, watching her car pull out of the driveway. It felt like a scene from one of those movies where the clueless husband has no idea what's coming. Except I wasn't clueless, not anymore. I didn't have enough to confront her yet, but the signs were too glaring to ignore. The guarded phone, the late nights, the sudden distance. It all pointed to one conclusion. She wasn't telling me the whole truth. I made up my mind to pay closer attention, not in a creepy or obsessive way, but by staying alert, looking for patterns and inconsistencies. I wasn't trying to trap her. I just wanted clarity. For now, though, I had to keep up the act of the oblivious husband and pretend everything was fine while I worked behind the scenes to uncover what was really going on. It's funny. Nobody ever thinks they'll find themselves in a situation like this. 5 years of marriage, and suddenly I was questioning everything I thought I knew about my wife and our relationship. But instincts don't lie, and mine were practically shouting at me to uncover the truth. Now it's Stephanie's turn. It started as a faint whisper in the back of my mind, barely noticeable at first. Pete and I had been together for 5 years, and I should have felt secure, even happy. But instead, there was this gnawing emptiness that grew louder with each passing day. Steph, have you seen my cufflinks? Pete called from the bedroom one morning, his voice muffled by the sound of drawers opening and closing. They're on the dresser, I replied without looking up from my coffee. I heard him muttering something under his breath as he continued to search. Then there was Mark. As these things always do, it started innocently enough. A comment here, a shared laugh there. Mark worked in my department, and he had a way of making you feel like the most important person in the room. One day during a coffee break, he leaned against the counter and smiled at me. You know, Stephanie, you're wasted here. You've got so much more to offer than this place. I laughed it off. Thanks, but I'm pretty sure HR wouldn't agree. No, I mean it, he said, his tone softer now. You deserve more than this, more than. He trailed off, but the implication lingered in the air. More than Pete. That thought stuck with me, buzzing around my head like an unwelcome guest. The turning point came after an office happy hour. We'd all had a few drinks, and Mark offered to walk me to my car. It was late, and the parking lot was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels heavy, filled with unspoken tension. As we reached my car, he hesitated. Stephanie, I just want to say, you're amazing. You really are. I laughed nervously, trying to brush it off. You're not so bad yourself. No, I mean it, he said, stepping closer. You deserve to be happy. Then he kissed me. It wasn't one of those big, dramatic kisses you see in the movies. It was gentle, almost cautious, as if he was giving me the chance to pull away. But I didn't. When I got home that evening, Pete was on the couch with his laptop open as usual. He barely glanced up. Hey, he said, his eyes still fixed on the screen. How was work? Fine, I answered, my voice sounding a little too high-pitched. Just the usual. If he noticed anything unusual, he didn't show it. That was Pete. He never picked up on things the way Mark did. Over the following weeks, Mark and I settled into a pattern. Coffee breaks became secret moments, and messages about work turned into something entirely different. One evening, Pete caught me grinning at my phone. What's so funny? He asked, looking over. Oh, just a meme from a coworker, I lied, sliding my phone into my pocket. He nodded and turned back to his laptop. One afternoon, after Mark and I had spent hours together, I blurted it out to him. I think I'm going to leave Pete. Mark studied me for a moment. Are you sure? Yes, I said, though I didn't feel as certain as I sounded. I can't keep living like this. I deserve to be happy. You do, he agreed, brushing my hand lightly, but don't rush. Make sure it's what you really want. That was Mark, always calm, always thoughtful. He didn't pressure me. He was just there, steady and supportive. Have you ever had one of those moments where the world feels like it's turned upside down? That was me, standing in the bedroom, staring at Stephanie's phone. It had been vibrating nonstop on the nightstand while she was in the shower. Normally, I wasn't the type to snoop, at least I hadn't been. But with everything going on, the late nights, the strange behavior, I gave in. I knew I shouldn't, but I did. It felt like opening Pandora's box. The messages between Stephanie and some guy named Mark weren't just flirtatious, they were explicit. Plans, jokes, even terms of endearment like my love. I sat there in disbelief, my stomach in knots, while the sound of running water continued in the background. I didn't confront her, not yet. I needed more than text messages. I needed proof. A few days later, I decided to confirm what I already feared. After her usual excuse about working late, I followed her car. It felt surreal, like I'd stepped into the role of an amateur detective. She drove to a nearby parking lot, and my worst suspicions were confirmed when I saw her meet him, Mark. From a distance, I watched them talk, laugh, and lean in far too close to be just friends. My chest tightened, but I stayed composed. I needed to confront her on my own terms. The chance came when she left the restaurant and headed to her car. I stepped out of mine and approached her. Enjoy your dinner, Steph? I asked sharply. She froze, her keys in hand. Pete, what are you doing here? Funny, I was about to ask you the same thing. Who's Mark? She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her face flushed, and for a moment it looked like she might deny everything. But then her expression hardened. You followed me? She asked accusingly. Don't act surprised. You've been lying to me for months. What did you expect? This is ridiculous, she snapped, trying to sidestep me. We're getting divorced anyway. Why does it matter? Why does it matter? I echoed, incredulous. Because you lied to me. You've been sneaking around pretending to be the perfect wife while cheating on me. Do you even realize how humiliating this is? She turned defensive. Maybe if you'd paid more attention to me instead of your job, I wouldn't have had to look elsewhere. Her words hit me like a slap, but I refused to let it show. Don't even try to make this about me. This isn't my fault. It's about the choices you made. Her glare was defiant. Fine, you want the truth? Yes, I've been seeing Mark. And honestly, he makes me feel things you haven't in years. I stared at her, her admission hitting me like a weight. You're unbelievable. Are we done here? She asked coldly, pushing past me to get into her car. I didn't stop her. I just watched as she drove away, feeling a mixture of anger and relief. At least now the pretense was over. Back home, I sat down and started writing a list, not of regrets, but of next steps. If she wanted to destroy our marriage, fine. But I wasn't going to let her drag me down with her. Pete had confronted me, and there was no escaping the truth anymore. The lies, the secrecy, the affair. It was all out in the open. I moved in with my mom. She didn't ask for details, though I could tell she knew something was wrong. Thankfully, she didn't push me for answers. I needed time to breathe and figure things out. But even at my mom's house, the guilt followed me. Every time I looked in the mirror, I saw a stranger staring back. I didn't recognize who I'd become. My thoughts kept drifting back to Pete. How calm he'd been, how detached. It was like I didn't even matter to him anymore, and maybe that's what hurt the most. I tried reaching out to Mark, but things between us were already starting to feel different. He was still there for me, but the spark that had once fueled our affair was fading. Maybe it was the weight of everything I'd left behind, or maybe it was the cold reality of the situation setting in. A few days after moving out, I called him. "Mark," I said, my voice unsteady, "I don't know what to do." "What do you mean?" he asked, sounding concerned. "I'm at my mom's house, and I don't know if I made the right choice," I admitted. "Everything feels like it's falling apart. Pete isn't fighting for me. He's just moving on." The silence on the other end of the line was heavy before Mark finally broke it. "Steph, you need to calm down," he said. "You're overthinking all of this." "I don't think I am," I replied quietly. My voice barely carried my conviction. I hadn't known what I wanted from that call with Mark, but whatever it was, it didn't make me feel any better. Nothing did. I was stuck, trapped in a mess of my own making, unable to see a way out. The days that followed were spent lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the choices that had brought me to this point. When it began, the affair with Mark had felt like a way to escape, a chance to feel something when my life with Pete seemed to be falling apart. But now, it felt like just another mistake, one I couldn't undo. I wasn't ready to talk to Pete again. I couldn't face him. But the longer I stayed at my mom's house, the clearer it became that the relationship I'd built with Pete was over. The days after Stephanie left were a blur. I told myself I was just going through the motions, but the truth was I was still struggling to process it. After everything, 5 years together, she had walked out like it meant nothing. The affair, the lies, everything was out in the open now, and there was no undoing it. A few days after she moved out, I reached out to a divorce lawyer. His name was Rick, a guy known for being efficient and straightforward. When I met him, I didn't waste time. I laid everything out for him, holding nothing back. He listened without surprise. It was probably routine for him, but that didn't make it any easier to say aloud. "You're in a tough spot, Pete," Rick said once I finished, "but it's clear you need to protect yourself financially and emotionally." I nodded, the weight of it all settling on me. "I need to make sure I'm not left with nothing," I told him. "She has to be held accountable." Rick agreed, and we began planning. His first recommendation was to organize our finances. I wasn't about to let her drain the savings account after everything that had happened. He suggested I withdraw half the money from our joint account. At first, it felt drastic, but the more I considered it, the more it made sense. She'd betrayed me. I had to protect myself. So I did it. I moved half the money out. I didn't feel guilty. It was a necessary step, and by that point, there was no room for second thoughts. But this wasn't just about the finances. Rick also urged me to gather solid evidence of the affair. Suspicions weren't enough. I needed undeniable proof. That's when I hired Jake, a private investigator known for uncovering the truth. I hesitated at first. It felt invasive, but with Rick's assurance that it was essential, I went through with it. Jake started following Stephanie, collecting photos, tracking her activities. It wasn't something I was proud of, but it was what I had to do to protect myself. Stephanie had crossed a line, and I couldn't let her use my vulnerability against me. What Jake uncovered was even more than I had expected. Photos of her with Mark, messages that went beyond flirtation, and GPS data showing where they'd spent time together. It was all laid out clearly, irrefutable evidence. My instincts had been right, but now I had the proof to back them up. I kept all the evidence secure, waiting for the right moment to use it. At this stage, I knew I couldn't let this drag on. Rick had also advised me to avoid any public confrontations. I couldn't risk Stephanie playing the victim or twisting the narrative. If I made a scene, there was every chance she'd spin the situation to her advantage. I needed to stay calm and strategic. Stephanie probably thought leaving me would let her escape the mess she had created. What she didn't realize was that her departure had set everything into motion. Now, I was in control, and there was no turning back. It wasn't just about her affair anymore. It was about taking my life back. I couldn't let her dictate my future. This time I had to fight for myself. When Pete handed me the divorce papers, it felt like the ground beneath me shifted. I hadn't expected him to act so decisively, but there it was. The documents were straightforward and included undeniable evidence of my affair with Mark, leaving no room for negotiation. It was final. I stood there frozen, staring at the papers as though holding them could somehow change what was happening. Pete wasn't angry, and that made it worse. He was detached, indifferent, as if he had already moved on. That was what stung the most. Not his rage, but his complete lack of regret. He was done with me, done with us. There was nothing I could say. I had made my choices, and now I had to face the consequences. The humiliation was suffocating, and I knew there was no way to fix it. I didn't want to fight anymore. I didn't want to drag this out. So I took what I could. My personal belongings, my share of the savings, and nothing else. I knew I wasn't entitled to anything more. I couldn't even be angry at Pete. This was the price I had to pay for my choices, the result of choosing Mark over the life I'd built with Pete. As I packed my belongings, part of me hoped, no, pleaded, that Mark might be there for me, that I could find comfort in his presence and his words. I wanted to believe I could leave all this chaos behind and start anew with him. But even as I folded my clothes and boxed up my life, I could feel that hope slipping away. Mark wasn't the answer I had convinced myself he was. The affair had been a betrayal, and now I was unraveling too. I reflected on the lies I had told myself, the way I justified my actions. I had convinced myself that Mark was my escape, the solution to everything wrong in my marriage. But now, standing on the brink of losing everything, my marriage, my affair, and my self-respect, I could see how misguided I had been. The relationship with Mark hadn't been a solution. It was just another poor choice in a string of bad decisions. I couldn't turn back time. I couldn't erase the pain I had caused Pete or undo the damage I had done to our trust. And yet, it wasn't Pete's indifference or even his decision to move on that left me shaken. It was his lack of anger. The cold, detached way he responded left me staggering. Still, I couldn't blame him. These were my decisions, and I had to live with the fallout.